into the object. And very straightforward, explicit memory decision. They're shown the object again, and they are asked, was it shown in the study phase? A simple yes/no task. So you can see on the one hand, we've got the implicit task followed by the recognition explicit task, all within one trial. So they did lots and lots and lots of trials of this kind of thing. This is basically what we've been doing for the last 6 to 8 weeks with all the participants. As I say, we've got 1,095, and this was all my dissertation students last week. I've tried to make it a bit of fun by bringing them a picnic, but they're basically going through all of those identification responses. I'm so sorry, so Nita's at the back kind of cringing a bit, but it's taken a bit longer than I anticipated, because every time they type in the object, obviously we have to check, and there's been some hilarious answers, and I think there was one where it was a pig and someone put my mum. It's terrible. So some of the answers you get quite anyway. So we're screening, we're going through all of this, and then please catch me in the corridor after Christmas when I'll be able to tell you actually what we found. But as I say, so I did want to use the extra. Oh, I'm using up more time than I thought, which is good. I'll spend the extra 7 minutes or so, or maybe not as long as that, just talking a little bit about another project. So completely different, but something I'm really, really excited about. It's something it's new for me. It's not something that I've done before. It's something I started with Alex, and then the whole James and Silas lovers got involved. And so we've done an experiment that's currently it's been submitted for publication, and we followed it up with another experiment which we're analysing at the moment. But we just found out, well, last week or the week before, that we got a grant from the BL Foundation. Yay! So we're going to be continuing this with over the next couple of years. So really excited about it, and I'll just talk you through the first experiment that we did very quickly. And it's actually really straightforward. It's the most straightforward experiment that I've done, and had the nicest, cleanest results I've ever got, so it's so exciting. Right, but it's all about, so how does rhythm affect memory? But we're really talking about, there's been some talk about music and things like that, but here we're really talking about rhythm in the sense of what we call temporal expectation. Okay, so if we know when something is going to happen in time, then that affects our processing. It can actually facilitate our processing of whatever that event is. So if you imagine in the lab, if you're a participant being presented with stimuli, if you know when it's going to come, then you have additional processing of that item. Okay, so this is basically what this says here. So if we can predict or anticipate events occurring, then we have greater processing of those items. And it's been shown, in lots of different cognitive domains that this kind of temporal prediction or expectation leads to benefits. But there's been very, very little, if not, well, nothing done on long-term memory, really. So we wanted to basically take this and see, does it benefit memory? But just a back step in terms of how we think it might, how this prediction might affect things in terms of enhancing our processing. Well, the brain is constantly kind of, you get your oscillations in your brain, your firing pattern all the time. But when you start to present stimuli in a rhythm to participants, the brain oscillations actually start to tap into that rhythm. And you can see they're oscillating here, and here we're presenting stimuli. And the brain waves, they start to tap into the rhythm. Okay, so your brain is in time and in keeping with this ongoing rhythm. And this we think is what may lead to additional processing of items that are presented in a rhythm. So it makes sense, right? We thought, does this affect memory? Is it beneficial to memory? And we, like I say, we came up with a really straightforward task to test this. So I'll just run you through what we did. And we had, in the same way that we have any memory experiment, we have an encoding phase or a study phase, followed by a test phase. And in the study phase of this task, we asked participants to do a detection task. So quite simply, they are presented with a stream of objects in amongst checkerboards. And the checkerboards were really just filler items in this case. And I think there were 6 encoding tasks that were blocked. So they have an encoding task followed by a recognition task. So 6 of them. But in 3 of the encoding tasks, all of the events that happened were rhythmic. They were constant. So what I mean by that is the fixation cross, was 600 milliseconds precisely, followed by the checkerboard for 600 milliseconds precisely, followed by the fixation, followed by the object. Every event was held constant at 600 milliseconds. So you could predict exactly what was going to happen and when. And in the other three blocks of the detection task, even though the object was presented for precisely 600 milliseconds, so they're held, the durations are held constant, what we changed is that the interval between the presentations was randomized. So the participant did not know when to expect the objects to occur in terms of timing. So the fixation point duration ranged in the random condition between 70 to 1,130 milliseconds. Okay, so it was, on the one hand, we have a condition that's very constant and rhythmic, and on the other hand, we have a condition where the participant doesn't know when to expect the next object to occur. We recorded EEG, so this is the stuff. This is really Alex's kind of thing. I haven't done much with EEG. Well, I haven't done anything with EEG before I did this experiment. And this is really just to see if there's a difference in activity for objects that are remembered later versus objects that are not remembered between these two conditions, the rhythmic and the random conditions. Recognition task, really straightforward. They're just the participants see an object, so half of the objects were new and half of them were shown before, and they are simply asked yes or no, was it shown in the encoding phase. Nice clean results. I'm sure you will guess what I'm going to say, but we had superior performance in the rhythmic condition. So behaviorally, there was a clear benefit. So when objects are presented in a rhythm, your memory processing, that's beneficial, and people were much better at recognizing objects when they had been presented in a rhythm. And bear in mind, so I did mention already that the objects were presented for equal duration, so it's purely the timing that we've interval between them. And just something that's just occurred to me, I forgot about this, but actually only 3 people out of the sample, I think it was a sample of 27 people, only 3 people were even aware of the differences in the timing, which I think is quite striking. EEG, so sorry, this might be quite small for some of you at the back, and like I said, it's really not my thing, but I'll just quickly say, so what we've got in terms of the EEG is a difference in terms of activity in the rhythmic and the random conditions. And we're looking at 2 main memory components known as, on the one hand, the FN400 and the LPC on the other hand. And what we're looking at here is in the rhythmic and the arrhythmic conditions, the FN400, we're seeing the same effect. But for the LPC, we only get an effect for the rhythmic condition. So something additional is going on in the rhythmic condition for this memory component. And that's kind of the key thing for the EEG data. And which, the mechanisms, I'm just finishing off. The mechanisms will be something we'll look at a bit later anyway. So that was the study that we started off with, and we've submitted this, so we're waiting for feedback on it, fingers crossed. And we have conducted a second study. Again, Anita, you seem to do everything. So Anita's been involved in study 2 as well, which actually she's writing up for her dissertation, which was basically the same thing, but we've added another element of spatial prediction as well as temporal prediction. And so what the grant is going to be all about, so the grant's hopefully starting next year at some point, and we're going to be looking at basically the mechanisms of the effect. So is it to do with rhythm per se and these oscillations that I've told you about, or is it simply the prediction that's important? Because it doesn't, for us to anticipate something, it doesn't necessarily need to be rhythmic, it could just follow a specific pattern. So these are the kind of questions we're going to address in the grant. And I believe I managed to fill 25 minutes. Any questions? Yes. 2 hands up.
I suppose it's more of a point or a question.
Yeah.
But I was sitting in a hearing test recently for one of my kids, and they present sounds. And I'm wondering whether they present it in a rhythmic fashion or a rhythmic fashion. So you wonder whether the child can predict when the next child comes, the next sound's coming in that they're not able to hear it.
I would imagine, yeah. It's from the evidence, it seems that anything rhythmic is beneficial to any kind of cognitive process. Just, yeah, interesting. Don't ask me a question about the second one. I don't know to answer.
Obviously, and coding, do you get congruency effects? So if the question is perceptual, is it rounded? And if both what you're being asked to implicitly encode and what you're asked to explicitly encode, if they're both rounded or if they're both
I had not even thought of that. I wonder if there's a way I can look at that. I did not think of that.
But have you got it random first?
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks for mentioning.
I've got a ballroom dancing experiment.
Yeah, the rhythm one.
Well, because in ballroom dancing you have music,
yeah.
Like for example, waltz, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
You have figures in specific figures that are not 1, 2, 3. So you get 1 and 2, 3, 1, 2,
Some are
1 and 2, and 3. But also then, so then that's compounded because you've then obviously got more. You've got more going on, so it's combined with how much information you have. But you actually also have figures that use more of the time. So in a box or a quickstep, you can do a slow, which takes 2 beats rather than 1 beat. So you can do an experiment to look at how you can, actually have more or less information in the same amount of time. In effect.
I think there's so much more. No, the more we think about this issue, the more we realise actually there is to do, and actually this is what we started the grant with, just to look at the mechanisms and extend it in that way. But there's so much scope. I can't believe no one has done this with memory. So yeah.
But there might be something that you can try to look at in the music.
Yeah, it's all
linked to literature, because this is precisely what has been argued many times. That is, because if you are exposed to anything musical, there is a regular beat. Then even the baby would automatically synchronize to the beat, and then depending on when it's being presented and so on. It's
interesting.
One of the aspects for which music is a facilitation for comedy stuff.
Yeah,
So
and
really
the thing is, there's parallels, and it's really
nice.
nice. But what's interesting as well is that I'm sure they may or may not talk about it more, but the EEG stuff, no one's done that. And just to see that there's difference actually in the activity, just that elemental side as well.
I think imagining this, I'm sure when I was young, I was taught to memorise numbers. But no longer had any basis. I really remember certainly phone numbers. Before people had mobile phones, you actually remembered people's numbers.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you learned them rhythmically. And I'm sure I was encouraged to learn them.
I remember doing my times tables in class, and we'd always shout them out in rhythm.
Yes, I mean, and the use of poetry to remember information.
Yeah, and now we have evidence behind it.
And music for like the ABC,
Yes,
the ABC.
it's very, very much what it teaches you.
Yeah.
Back in the dark ages.
There is a method that is called rhythmia, that is a method based on rhythmic exercise in order to stimulate the cognitive function. They use that now they are trying to make more study on it. That use this kind of rhythmic patterns in order to stimulate the memory. They found some good results in that. So.
Okay, I have to look into that one.
Interesting.
Thank you very much. Fantastic.
And now the Joan Silas Lab. Creators will be. I know you know what the Science Museum project is, what it's all about, you did before, now we're going to learn a bit more about.
Is Arizona here?
Should be. Oh yes, Joan Silas.
How long have we got?
Good job. Yes.
20-25 minutes. Well, maybe 20 minutes. Maybe 50. Yeah, 10. All right. Okay. Yeah. So we thought
we volunteered, the one who volunteered us to give a little talk.
You volunteered.
I volunteered you. And obviously we were here doing this last year, so we thought, okay, what should we do? Well, we'll present a few projects that we've been doing in 2018, basically.
An update, as it were.
An update from the last PARSE presentation. Yeah.
Most important bit of information is people kept confusing us as one person or thinking I was just spelling my name wrong. So, importantly, we've rebranded. We're now Jones and Sons now. So, get rid of any confusion.
It was very, yeah, so we'll present a few projects we've got going in the lab and what we'll be doing, some results.
Some results, some publications, and some kind of what we're up to at the moment.
Yeah. And leading on from Emma, so obviously, as Emma said, we were at the science thing last year. So we just finished, this time last year, I think we just finished doing some data collection. We hadn't analysed any data either.
Just like Emma.
Yeah, just like Emma. Oh yeah, so the next slide is one thing we did as part of it. So we did a few different tasks, but one thing we had a questionnaire. And then because we saw, okay, we got this opportunity, we'll use this questionnaire in the science museum. And this questionnaire is the MAIA, multidimensional assessment of intersective awareness. So kind of how well you know yourself. So it's a questionnaire published in 2012, I think. Anyway, by this Wolf Mealing. So we thought, okay, we'll email him and say, oh, we're going to get this big sample, diverse sample, and we thought we'd use your questionnaire. And he said, oh, excellent. By the way, I'm looking to improve it a little bit. So we've got a few items, a few questions in the questionnaire which we're not too happy with. We're thinking about adding some more questions. Anyway, on that basis, he sent the questions over. We met up with him as well.
We included the older items in the original version and some new items, and they did some fancy factors statistics on them. And it turned out that the new items were better. They worked better for the scale. The factors rotated a little bit better, explained more of the variance. And just recently, we published the second version of it alongside. So, selling our skills for those citations.
Yeah. Data collection. Yeah, that's what we did. But yeah, so that's a bit of it. So that's actually quite, we've got still quite a bit more data analysis to do on the science museum data. Yeah, that's just kind of tiny with them. Right, okay, so another project going on is, and I think a lot of this is to do with attention. And we're going to look at individualizing alpha.
So from here on in, much of our stuff is about attentional processes and a brain frequency of interest to us. It's the alpha rhythm that we typically measure using EEG. Right? So that's the same slide there. That's the same picture that Emma had up. Oh, right.
Yeah, send me the slides. Yeah. We do a lot of EEG measuring in the lab. We've done a lot of projects on that. That's one thing we're looking at is alpha. So this is oscillation, brain oscillation going in the kind of 8 to 14 frequency range. And a particular interest, so we know that alpha, for example, is modulated, but if you focus your attention, then you see changes in alpha, and that's fairly well established now. That's been going on for quite a long time. And when I say it changes in alpha, I mean change in alpha power. So these brain waves, the oscillations, they go slightly nuts like this. Same frequency still, the 8 to 10 hertz, but they go a bit bigger when you start focusing attention. Or the other way around, actually, but they change at least. But we're also interested in the fact that some more recently it's come out that there's this individualizing alpha. And as I said, alpha is a kind of 8 to 14 frequency range. It's quite a broad frequency range. But it turns out that people have preferred alphas. Okay, so when you're focusing attention, if you measure the EEG on me, my alpha might be down on 10, but John's might be 9, Jackie's 13, something like that. So everyone's got this specific kind of individualized peak alpha. It's not higher, it's not better. And this is also something which there is a kind of a age change in this. So kind of your alpha tends to go up to about adulthood, and then it goes down. The peak alpha, so your peak frequency tends to go up, and then it goes down, and also with some neurological disease, your peak alpha kind of goes down. Otherwise, it's quite stable. Yes.
So typically, this is done in resting state. People just sit still. We record EEG frequencies, and we get out a measure of your individualized peak alpha frequency. We'll point out that most of this work is done by Tony over there, looking more handsome in this picture. And also funded by the VR. So this is our previous grant with VR. That's still okay. So rather than look at alpha at resting state, we wanted to look at task-related changes to alpha. This isn't something particularly new, but as Alex mentioned, most people look at a change in alpha power. So instead of looking at a change in alpha power that's task-dependent, we wanted to look at a change in peak alpha frequency that's task-dependent. Because it's Alex, we ended up working with tactile attention, and and we did 4 different tasks that were related to shifting your attentional mechanisms. We're not going to get into the details of our tasks, but all of them were perceptually identical. Suffice to say, all of them are perceptually identical. All that differs between them is how you shift your attention. And then we used a method to decompose the EG frequency where that's time and frequency specific. So we can both extract time and the specific frequency of any alpha changes. So we look at individual peak alpha changes, where the greatest change in alpha is, at which frequency range it's in, and also when that happens on the temporal spectrum as well. So look, time on the x-axis, frequency on the y-axis, and power is color. Right? And we find these differences. We find these differences between the task and where your peak alpha frequency is and when it changes. Right? So we can say something that not only does the power of the alpha frequency change dependent on your attentional mechanisms, but also the frequency that actually changes and when it changes is dependent on the task that you're engaged with. Right?
Next project.
So it follows on. This stuff is all quite related.
Again, we're sticking with attention and alpha and now a bit of machine learning. So we're using a very similar paradigm. So again, I won't go into the details really, but there's tactile again. You get some taps on your fingers. They are perceptually identical. The 3 different tasks in this case, but essentially it's the instruction you give the participant for the task, which changes in the 3 different tasks basically. So it's you get a tap to your right, you say ignore it, or you say focus to the right or focus to the left. So all which is different in 3 different tasks the participant does is kind of their instruction, what they're told to do, so they're shifting attention.
And we can dissociate these tasks behaviorally. They have well-established behavioral differences, right? The way people respond to them. So we look, again, we take this, the EG information out during this period where you received a cue and you do whatever we told you to do. You focus your attention or you ignore that cue or whatever you like. We have these 3 sets of tasks. We extract the data for each individual trial, right? For each individual participant, and then we give it to Eris. Yeah.
So this kind of came about. So Eris and the PARSE, we've been working on this project for quite a couple of years now at least. And kind of bit before we go into the results, just the project. And so Eris is he's a lecturer in design engineering and mathematics department. And he does machine learning and so on.
And a lot of teaching.
A lot of teaching. Yeah.
Very busy man.
But one thing we kind of find out, so the first time we work together on this is actually just getting the data in the right order. Because either we collect some data in one way and have it in a couple of places, whether it's ePrime, MATLAB, and SPSS, and they don't work in that way. They want everything in Python, and these kind of things. So just kind of structuring the data and getting it together took a while. It was greatly facilitated by an Erasmus student who came along, and I think she was there for a year, but she pretty much worked 6 months on this project.
Really ran with it. Yeah.
Elena from Spain worked with this and actually did. So these are her graphs we're showing. Some machine learning.
What they did is we give them the data. They take 90% of the data and they train a classifier. So this classifier is able to distinguish, or they train a classifier to be able to tell which task is being done by the participant based on the alpha data. And then they test that data on 10% of the leftover data. And so 33% is chance, right? That's our bottom bit here. And so the machine performs above chance, right? Significantly above chance. It's able to tell what task the individual is engaged with based solely on the alpha data that we've extracted. So the power of this approach means that we can tell from the information that we've extracted from the EEG that it's sufficient to be able to distinguish what task the participant engaged in. So it's a much more powerful approach than what we usually use when we analyze our EEG data. We know that the information there is good enough to distinguish what task the participant is engaged in. And we can go a little bit further as well. We can go a little bit further as well. We can look at the data by separating it based on hemisphere, rather than raw hemisphere, where we looked at whether it's contralateral to the attended side or ipsilateral to the attended side. We show this nice shift in the predictability of the data. So early on, contralateral information does better in predicting which task you do, and later on, ipsilateral information takes over and is more useful to be able to tell what task the participants engage in. Cool?
Mm-hmm. Attention and alpha
Again.
And add in a little bit of brain stimulation.
So this is this is part of our BL grant, and we formalised our ideas in the form of a grant. When we've got the grant, we realised that we had pretty structured, very set, concrete hypotheses and an idea for the analysis and the methods that we wanted to do. So because we had that, we thought we'd stick in a registered report. So we pre-registered this information, and just talk you a little bit about our trials and tribulations through submitting a registered report. So because we had this very concrete idea, we thought it was well suited to a registered report. And there's two ways you can kind of register reports, register a study. You can stick up all your information on Open Science Foundation, which we've done, but you can also go to a journal and ask them for a in-principle acceptance of your work. So they review the work based on the question, whether it's good enough, whether your methods are rigorous enough, and whether your analysis procedure fits that approach. So that's what we did. We went to Cortex, and we now have an in-principle acceptance for publication based on our ideas and the method that we're going to do, and we're sticking all that information up on OSF.
Yeah, and I mean, it was, so there's two ways of doing it. We went to the harder route is to kind of do the whole review process. So this took a bit longer than we hoped, but it took a long time. So we went through, I think, 3 stages of just editorial reviews first before it even went out to review, and then a lot of statisticians got involved. And I think one of the main things which we found was that we kind of thought, we'll do power analysis, we'll just open G power and put some stuff in, because this is kind of the way we do stuff. But then we got quickly told that we did it. It's not well wrong or not correct enough. And one thing, an issue we have, we would say this, so the registered report and the in-principle acceptance, this kind of way journals are doing it, is something I'd say jump on the bandwagon, because it is fairly new and they're a lot more accommodating, a lot more, they walk you through a lot more things. So normal editors just go, you did something wrong, and then they'll check the paper out. Here they'll come back with a lot more constructive feedback, because the people who are, in this area, they are really, trying to get people to do this.
By far the most rigorous review process I've been through, but also by far the most helpful review process.
Yes, it has been. Yeah.
So also they're not criticizing your data or your ideas, they're trying to make it better. They're trying to help you make it better so that what you go and do actually makes sense.
It should also say, so one of the issues with the power analysis, so we just thought, that we wanted to power an interaction, and so we thought we'd put an interaction into G power, but little did we know that there's no software which can power it within subject interaction.
No off-the-shelf software that can power a within subject interaction.
So we then contacted Keelan. There's a friend and colleague at City, because it turned out you need to simulate and model the data and do very clever things with it.
So in effect, you can't do a sample size estimation for a within subjects interaction. There's no kind of formula that does that for you. You have to model it, you have to simulate the data iteratively, and then produce what you expect your sample size to be. So we don't have to do that, but Keelan, thankfully, does. And he did. He goes in. So this is what we're actually going to do.
Well, we started.
Yeah, we started. We're actually collecting data. There's actually data up on the internet.
So it's a large project. We collect a lot of data, and we got some people working on it, and we also got an intern arriving
January.
January from Lyon University, because we work in Anonymous. And we're doing, it's quite big because we're going to take this individualized alpha. So take EEG of someone's head, say, what's your alpha, Lisa? It is 12.5. And then we stick that back in the brain using taps.
So shifting away from EEG, EEG and neuroimaging techniques are hugely useful because it allows us to measure brain states non-invasively. The problem with neuroimaging techniques is, by their very nature, they're correlative. Right? So what you might be measuring could be epiphenomenal to the mechanism that you're trying to get at. So a way to get around that is to change the brain state and observe an effect on behavior. So this is what non-invasive brain stimulation techniques are for, TMS, TDCS, and a whole load of other ones. But TACS, transcranial alternating current stimulation, allows us to put a frequency back into the brain. We measure the frequency, we individualize it for that person, and then we put it back into the brain while they engage in these attentional detection tasks. And we've got 3 very rigorous controls. So one where we put alpha back in, these will be counterbalanced across participants, their order. One where we put the alpha that we measured back into the brain and we expect it to change attention. And then 2 controls. One where we sham, where we just switch the machine on and switch it off again. Another where we put a frequency back into the brain that we don't expect to affect the attentional processes. So a highly controlled experiment. As well as that, we model where we try the regions of the brain that we're trying to affect. We place on a simulated brain electrodes on the surface of the skull, put the current in the brain that we're going to put back into the brain and look at the regions that it affects. So we have a good idea of the causal regions that we're going to affect. So this is TACS, as you see it advertised on various websites, and this is TACS in reality. And Alex may put another picture in. But as you can see, he looks pretty stupid.
Yeah, I see. Okay, and then we just got a few other bits and pieces. Last year we stood here and said we were going to launch a MSc research in cognitive neuroscience. We've now done that. We've got 2 students on board, 2 pretty good students on board. Wayne and Stevis, that's Wayne in the top right. So Wayne's actually taken a very technical role. So he's on the background being, I'd say, that a lot of the stuff we do when we present stuff at alpha, or beta, whereas it's the timing. Timing of things is crucial for us. When we'll do things with Emma in the middle and so on. So we want millisecond accuracy when we do things. We didn't really have that. I mean, we had within, maybe 10 millisecond accuracy, but we want very much more precise accuracy. So Wayne has reconfigured the lab currently and basically got a system so we can present EA, where we can record EEG, we can present TACS and behavioral, we can record behavior, present tactile, visual and auditory state, all within about 0.1 of a millisecond accuracy. So this opens up a whole new possibility that we can say a lot more, presenting things in and out of phase, but we won't go into too much detail.
It's hugely important because as we're starting to think about rhythmic presentation, and we're thinking about brain waves that oscillate at least 10 times a second. And if you're 50 milliseconds out, you're anti-phase in that 50 milliseconds. 25 milliseconds, your quarter of phase will be looking at. So that sub-millisecond accuracy is really, really important. And Wayne's basically achieved it for us. He leaves, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
And we have another master student who's another master student who's taking a kind of slightly more traditional psychological approach to things. We're looking at how attention is preferential towards biological movement, and looking at the neural mechanisms that underpin that attentional shifting.
Yes, of course. We do all of this mainly to start with the lab team, and they do most of the work. And then we collaborate with all sorts of people who are also very clever and help us out. On the right there's some other publications we had over the last year. And that's it. Thank you.
Moving. What was the one on the left?
Scrambled.
Is it just a scramble?
So this is the try and get it here.
That's the walker on the right.
It's the exact same information. Those dots follow the same vectors, so they move at the same speed,
Okay.
but they are the arrangement of them has been jumbled up.
Fantastic.
So it's perceptually identical, but it doesn't cohere to provide biological information.
And that took, it took quite a lot of MATLAB coding from fairness to get these.
Yeah, MATLAB coding and also haranguing loads of researchers who already had the stimuli, rather than we asked Mark, you would know how. So we had to ask other people.
Wow, well, that's really clever. Thank you. Yeah. Right, questions, anybody? No.
I was a bit intrigued as to when you did the machine learning. You threw in the phrase that said this results more power. I think it was the word powerful.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
Nice job.
So typically what we do, right, is we measure EEG data and we look at differences between conditions between groups. And that tells us that the brain data for one condition is different than it is for another condition. When we use a machine and we train a machine and classify it and then ask it, if it performs above chance, we know that the information itself is sufficient to be able to tell the conditions apart. We don't know that when we do our standard inferential stuff.
Aren't you simply saying if you get 10% of your data back and you threw some sample which was correlational, that actually it falls in the study, it's fine, if not, aren't you doing exactly the same thing?
Well, you could.
It's more impressive when it's I agree.
So yeah, you could do it iteratively, right? You could do it repeated testing and inferential. Yeah, it's just another approach. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So what was the level of reliability you had? And I'll say why I'm asking. I'm doing something like
So
that.
what do you mean? So you mean how good was it at classifying?
Idea of what is reliable.
So you mean
reliable prediction?
the machine learning stuff? So it's just above So it's just above chance. Yeah, it's something like 37%.
Sorry?
37%. 33%. But
No, I'm curious because I'm doing something with exercise. People are inferior. When I saw this, I said, well, this is not reliable. I mean, behavioral data. Behavioral data.
So it depends what you mean by reliable.
At least 80%, and we look at that. That's crazy.
Oh,
So I'm just curious about what you have.
it depends what you mean by reliable, because we can use the data iteratively and get this result. So we can chuck 10% of the data out from different parts of the data and still get this finding. So it's reliable, but how valid is, I think, is probably better. How valid is a different question. I mean, but machine learning in neuroscience is typically not much higher than this.
That's what I.
Yeah.
Engineering is
The first machine learning Haxby study that used in 2006 is like 52%, where chance is 50.
I've got a question or observation. I really like the way you set up your lab, where you're reaching out to other academics internationally, where you're producing undergraduate students, where, and dissertation students. I mean, you've really got a good operation there.
I've got a very good
It's
team.
not very expensive, so well done.
We have got a very good team, and this is this is what we strive for, and we've been lucky, I suppose, but it's get a team together and that they kind of help each other out a lot of the time when we're busy teaching. And they spend a lot of time in the lab and help each other out. So yeah, and we have regular lab meetings if anyone attend at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday, where we go through and everyone updates on the project.
We love the way you finish each other's sentences.
You work well.
There you go.
I can feel it from here, so just don't ask. Anyone else? Go swimming then.
Got an extension.
I think, yeah, well, thank you very much, guys. We've got coffee coming up, but we just need to let these lovely ladies do their job for a minute.